Hi, welcome back. In today's discussion, I had the great pleasure of talking with Steve Boese. Steve, as you likely know, is the chair of the HR Technology Conference. He's also the president of H3 HR Advisors, and he's a longtime podcaster. Among other podcasts, he hosts HR Happy Hour with Trish Deed. It was super fun talking with Steve. He shared a bit about his past, what he thinks about the world of HR tech and the role of generative AI, and he also shared his perspective and ideas in response to my rapid fire questions at the end. And suffice it to say, we are aligned on many fronts. So, again, thank you for being here. And please check out our new website. That's myfow.net. That stands for My Future of Work. We have a host of resources that you can use to learn more about the future of work and how individuals, teams, groups, and organizations can prepare more consciously and effectively. So again, thank you for being here and enjoy. Hi, welcome back. I'm here with my longtime friend and colleague, Steve Boese, who also happens to be the chair of the HR Technology Conference. Steve, how you doing?
Al, I'm well. Thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun. I'm excited to talk to you. And I don't know about everyone else listening to this. I don't know where I am, what city I'm in, what's going on next. I just got home. I got home at 1:30 in the morning last night from an event. And I had an 8 o'clock call this morning about another event. So yeah, we're in full swing right now. It's first world problems, certainly, but yeah, it's going crazy right now.
You got a little gathering, a little event coming up. So I imagine you're, preparing for that, as am I, as are hundreds, actually thousands of people. So we'll definitely talk about that. But before we get into that, I want to hear your story, as do our listeners, what you're working on now, not only with the HR Tech conference, but also in your own consulting practice. And finally, talk about the future of work, future of HR tech, work tech. Would love to get your perspectives and ideas, but before we get started, you know, where are you now?
Yeah, I'm in Illinois, Southern Illinois, as we speak, and we have our company's H3 HR Advisors. My partner's Trish Steed, also Karen Steed works with us as well. And Trish and I have been working together a really long time. So folks might know us from a lot of the media that we've done over the years. So I feel pretty, this is like a testament to how old I am, Al. I hate to bring up that fact, honestly, but we created something called the HR Happy Hour show back in 2009, and it was so long ago. It's now a podcast, right? Which is what we're recording today, but it was so long ago, this thing that we did, which was essentially a podcast. I didn't even call it a podcast, and I'm not sure I even knew that term really all that well in 2009. So folks might know us from that, and we've certainly expanded the media that we do over the years into a network of podcasts and some videos, shows that we do, and some other things. But we also do a lot of advisory work in the HR technology community, both on product strategy, market strategy, go-to-market strategies, and certainly content creation, among other things. And it's awesome. It's fun. We get to work with some of the most innovative companies in this market. It's as Al and folks listening to this market has exploded over the last 15 years or so, right? Since the birth of HR Happy Hour, which is almost 15 years ago, just in its size, it's in its level, the amount of innovation, the level of investment, right? Our friend George Larock tracks this really closely, right? All the billions, literally billion dollars with a B, billions that's come into this market over the last decade or so. So it's a dynamic market. It's a fun market. And I'll say this, Al, the reason why I like it, the reason why I was drawn to it and remain excited about it was from how I got into it. I'll tell a real quick story if it's okay with you.
Wait,
I came up in finance and accounting, right? As boring as it gets, but important, right? To corporations and organizations. I was finance and accounting guy. And I made that subtle move into IT, enterprise IT, right? ERP kinds of things, right? So big ERP systems, doing finance, doing procurement, procure to pay and order to cash, right? All those kinds of things. And I had a really great client who I had worked on for a long time on doing procure to pay. And I got to tell you, bless them, but the people who work on accounts payable systems, it's not the most exciting thing and it's not the most impactful thing. And this particular client was moving from phase 1 and 2, which was finance and procurement and procure to pay and all that stuff, to HR and payroll. That was going to be phase 3 and 4 of this big ERP project. And we had such a great relationship, they said, "We'd love you to stay along, right? Stay on board and help us implement these HR and payroll systems." I didn't know anything about them. And I told them that. I said, "I don't know HR and payroll systems. I've never done them." And they said, "That's okay. Our business now, you'll we'll all learn together how to do it." They were the best client ever in the world that let me, the consultant, right, learn about HR and payroll. And then one of the first projects I did there was actually benefits. And we did open enrollment online. And it was the first time this organization had ever done it, right, for their annual open enrollment process to do it online. And it was tricky. The technology wasn't that awesome, quite frankly. It was a while ago now. But when we got to the individual people in the organization, the users, or who were the employees, right? Everybody had to open enroll, right? It was a positive enrollment, it happened to be. And you sat with them and I went to workshops and I sat with them one on one, literally individually, right? I must have helped 100 people that first year, like enroll in their benefits, just me and that person, right? At a PC. And saw it in their eyes, just how important it was to them that their benefits were correct. They picked the right medical plan, that their family members were covered appropriately, that they had signed up for the correct amount of like disability insurance or life insurance for their particular needs and their situation, and how meaningful it was in the real world. I'm not talking about at work, really, right? And you didn't get that. I never got that from accounting and finance and payables and procurement. And that was it. That was really the hook for me. I said, these technologies actually have impact and real meaning in people's lives and in the lives of their family members to some extent, right? In HR and payroll and benefits and things like that. So I was hooked. I love the technology, of course. I became a tech guy, but these technologies in particular that really have a role to play in the well-being, financial well-being, emotional well-being, professional well-being and development, all the things, right? I love it. I love this space. I love the market. And I've been fortunate enough for the last 15 years or so to get to do a lot of really fun things. So I apologize for the very long answer, Al, and listeners as well. But I think if you're going to be in enterprise technology for me, this is the place to be.
Yeah, quite the contrary. Never have to apologize, particularly for number one, it's a very virtuous perspective and stance that you are acknowledging our discipline has. And I think it's oftentimes lost to your point. Oh, it's only comp, it's only benefits, it's only this. Getting paid promptly is a big deal. I was about to use an adjective in there, which would be inappropriate for this show, but you get the idea. Is that your appreciation speaks to me, and certainly speaks to our listeners because we need more people to appreciate the value that not only what we're delivering, but the risk of not doing it well. And not only does it relate to comp and ben, it relates to everything throughout the employee experience, which of course we can talk about when we talk about the evolution of the space. But before we go further, when you tell that story, what year are we talking about roughly?
So the benefits open enrollment story would have been, oh, great question. I would say probably an '08, '09 timeframe, probably that was going on, maybe into 2010, early 2010 or something like that. It was very typical story that many of the folks who were HR technology, maybe managers or directors or implementers, consultants would have been familiar with, right? We're taking an organization from a previous manual paper-based process and we're going to automate slash digitize it for the very first time. And so I had this particular organization, in this particular example was annual benefits open enrollment, which was the classic forms brought to the HR department. And now it's going to be an online thing. And we had, it was really the nascent years in this particular organization of any kind of employee access, direct access to their own information in the HR system. And it's yeah. Again, we talk about it dates us a little bit about our age, but I think with age, you get a little bit of perspective, right? And so you do recall a time, right, in organizations where looking up, I'm holding up my phone for folks who are just listening to the audio, looking up your payslip on your phone was just simply not possible. It was not a thing that you could do. That's a relatively recent development in enterprise technology and in HR technology. Yeah, it was in that time period. And yeah, it was something, but the benefits in particular, but you can have this conversation in compensation. You can have this conversation in development, in succession planning. These technologies help organizations manage their operations, manage their businesses, serve their customers these technologies also help people manage their lives, right? And they have just the amount of impact that they can have, if, especially if done well, is quite profound. And still, I've told that story a number of times, but because it resonated with me so much, and it still does, honestly.
I wanna stick with that time frame because, correct me if I'm wrong, you said earlier, that's roughly the time that you started HR Happy Hour.
Yeah.
And so how did that come about?
Yeah, that's a funny story as well. By accident, like I suppose with a lot of our career arcs, right? We've had all probably had multiple twists and turns to get us to where we're at right now. I was working. I had them as a client, and I worked for a time at a college in upstate New York, Western New York, to be more specific. And um, this college had a graduate degree program in human resource development. And it was a great program. They were covering all the D topics and management topics, leadership topics, and the various things that go into. I should know all of them. I don't, but they were the professor who's the department chair recognized that, hey, technology is increasingly becoming an important skill set and an expertise, a requirement for that kind of expertise that HR leaders today, and this is again back in 08, 09 timeframe, then and even certainly going forward, right? And she was right, as we see now in 2023. But HR leaders going forward really need to have a little bit more acumen around, right? Not just business acumen, which was in vogue back then, right? Everybody was telling HR people to go get an MBA. Like
Yep.
everybody in the world was telling HR, go get MBAs. That was the advice for at least 5 years, maybe more. But what's happening in technology? Cloud technology was really starting to catch on in the HR space and certainly in the recruiting space. And so she approached me because I was running the HR technology in house for this college. And she
Mhm.
approached me. I didn't even know her. And she said, we want to present a class. We want to create a class and offer it in our master's program in HRD around HR technology. Will you create this class and teach it? And because I wasn't I was so dumb, it sounded interesting and exciting to me. I said, "Sure, I'll do that." Easy. Not realizing how hard it would be just because at least back then, and it's better now, it's much better now, but back then in '08 or so, or maybe even '07 when I started down this path, it probably took me about a year to get it going. There was no textbook really. I couldn't find one. I found one that was like Human Resource Information Systems Volume 3. It was written in the early '90s maybe or something
Yeah.
like that. I
Yeah.
don't know. I couldn't find anything, right? And maybe I didn't know where to look even, right? And I set about trying to create content for this course and trying to provide assets and resources for the students, like essentially a reading list, if you will. And so one of the ideas I came up with was, why don't I find and connect with experts like yourself, people working at the providers, maybe other professors, anybody I could think of, other HR leaders, and I'll interview them, and I'll record the interviews, and I'll have the students listen to them. I was just grasping like for ideas of what to do for content. And then so that I said, "Okay, I'll do that." But then I didn't have any way. I was so dumb. I was just in my office in Western New York. Wasn't gonna get on a plane to fly to Silicon Valley or New York City or anywhere else. I had to figure out how to record these interviews remotely. And so I found this platform, which I still use today, like all these years later, that allowed me to record the interviews like basically a radio show. And that became the podcast. So it was literally just a mechanism for me to record interviews that I was going to use for this class I was teaching in human resources development. And sometime after that, a small but pretty vibrant network of people who had embraced social media pretty actively, but it's social media for work really and for professional
Yeah.
development, mainly on Twitter back then. So this is 809 time frame. Twitter was really vibrant. HR Twitter was pretty new but growing, and the blogging community was pretty vibrant back then as well. I had an HR blog that I'd started around the same time. And we turned that little exercise into basically an online radio show, if you will, that's streamed on Blog Talk Radio, which is still there today. I don't do them live anymore, but we used to do them live and stream them audio only on Thursday nights at 8 o'clock at night, Eastern time. So since the show was on at night, It was the whole idea was get a cocktail or whatever it is you like to do in the evening. It's called HR happy hour, and we'll hang out for an hour and talk about HR and HR tech and the world of work. And we had guests, we had callers and all of those things. So we started it back then and it caught on. It became fairly popular. There we had the advantage of being first movers. There really was one other guy doing a recruiting podcast back then, and it was us, right? And now there's lots, right? And which is
Right.
great. But we started it back then and we've evolved over the years and we've done a lot of things. And I think I don't know how many shows we've done on the HR happy hour, but on the network, we have a network of shows and we have some other folks who publish titles on our network. We're probably at 700 shows or something like that at this point since
Wow.
2009. So it's loads of fun. We just recorded one yesterday. As a matter of fact, we were out at Oracle Cloud World is where I was. And we sat down with some of the execs from Oracle and recorded. So it's a fun project and we still like doing it.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. I love the story behind it and I'd love to hear more about it in the future, maybe next month there in Vegas.
Yeah.
So, before we talk about Vegas and the future and all those things, will you take us back? Where did you grow up? What did you study? Any experiences that you had when you were a young person that inspired you to get into finance and in turn, yeah, HR? Again, where did you grow up?
Yeah, it's great. I haven't talked about this stuff in ages. So I appreciate you asking about it, Al. I grew up in New Jersey and central New Jersey. So it was like, I suppose, commuter community to New York City, although it was a pretty busy area in its own right. But a 30-minute train ride away from Manhattan, from Penn Station, which was fun, right? Especially as a 15, 16-year old to get with your buddies and get on the train to New York and think you were like really like a big shot. But I grew up in New Jersey and I think how I got into finance was I majored it in college, but I'm of that age for sure. And maybe parents still do this, although I did not do this with my child. I'll say this, but maybe parents still do this. And it was more like you need to pick a major in school that's going to give you the best employment opportunities or prospects, right? Once you graduate. And certainly my dad, it was primarily coached me hard into majoring in accounting or finance, whatever I ended up. It wasn't accounting technically, it was just business finance, but that was it. I just fell into that too. I was a dumb kid, right? I didn't know. And I didn't have any particular calling into the arts or to a particular science, right? Nor did I have any special skills. So I think it sounded good enough to me to go that route. And when I left college, when I graduated, went right into the corporate world. And my first real job, corporate job, was AT&T, which is still around, but it was a different AT&T back then. It was not quite the monopoly AT&T of yore, but it was still close. For folks who care about this or remember, AT&T went through two really big divestitures, right, in their corporate arc. The first one was when all the regional phone companies is what they were called, or they were called regional bell operating companies. I still remember the term. Were spun off by the government forced AT&T to spin those off, so that became your Southern Bell, which is Bell South and Pacific Bell and Bell Atlantic, which now all have different names. But at the time, those were all divested from AT&T. And then a few years later, the manufacturing, a big piece of the manufacturing part of AT&T was spun off into a company which was initially named Lucent Technologies, which became Alcatel-Lucent, and then now I think it's owned by Nokia. The part of AT&T I worked for was that part, the equipment part of AT&T, equipment manufacturing. So think about we were the part of the company that made the equipment that made things like international calls possible, long distance calls possible, even connecting local calls. If you went to a local phone company anywhere in America, honestly, almost everywhere in the world, but anywhere in America, certainly the building was full of AT&T networking equipment and phone switching equipment. And that was the part of AT&T I worked in and was like a finance guy there. And so it was fun, but I much more preferred getting into the IT side, which I did shortly thereafter, and then worked my way into HR technology, as I talked about a couple of minutes ago.
Tell us about it. So you went from finance to IT. Was that something that you nurtured yourself based on your interest, or you were you placed there kind
A
of
little bit.
serendipitously?
A
Yeah.
little bit. It's funny because the technology is so ancient as I think back upon it now, because I'm old, but much like we hear often in workplaces today, right? There's this kind of, I don't know, I don't know if it's myth, but it's largely true, right? We always talk about, oh, that next generation, they embrace technology faster, they pick it up faster, they live with it, et cetera, et cetera. They warm up to it faster, and the older folks, no matter what the technology is or what era we're in, they're slower to adjust. And so when I first started in my career at AT&T, I was just like that. I was 22 years old, and we had technology that we used, right, to do the accounting and do the finance and create the reports and create the management presentations, et cetera. And even back then, new technology was changing and getting better and advancing. And so I think I learned how to make pie charts on a very early version of PowerPoint or something like that. And so at 22 and 23, you don't care. You just want to learn new things. And I showed some ability or capability using the technology that we had on hand at the time, both for creating financial reports and doing presentations and all the things that were very technical. And honestly, some of the folks, more experienced folks on these teams, just weren't either excited to embrace or didn't quite grab onto them as quickly. And I was really lucky to have a a person in our management hierarchy. He wasn't even my boss. He was probably my boss's boss, maybe. He was a couple levels above us, but he was a younger guy himself, honestly. And didn't care so much about the hierarchy or the seniority, which was rare for AT&T and T, and certainly back then. He recognized myself and a couple of other folks who were new on the team, really took a shine to some of these technologies and innovating, trying to come up with better ways to do things, and just kept giving us good assignments. Oh, let's do this. Oh, I've got a big meeting with the big CFO. Make me a presentation that has blah, blah, blah. And so we kept getting these really good assignments. And a couple of years later, AT&T at the time won at the time, I don't remember the number, let's call it $10 billion, a huge contract to basically build the first cellular phone network in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They didn't have one. Cellular technology was pretty new, right? I didn't have a cell phone myself at the time. And so when this contract was won, though, the sleepy little office in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, which might have had half a dozen people in it, all of a sudden had to support a $10 billion 7-year contract to basically build, right, mobile technology as it existed at the time. This is like the mid 90s in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They had to send people there. And one of the things that had to be done once we got there, and I did go, and one of the things that had to be done when we got there was set up the enterprise accounting systems, human resources systems, and payroll systems. We had to basically do all the IT work so that we could support, I don't know, 10x hiring needs. We went from they went from 10 people working in Saudi Arabia to 1,000 probably like in 6 months, and just paying all the bills and getting everybody paid and organizing it all. And so we had to implement, and we did a really big enterprise resource ERP system implementation in the kingdom. And it took a year or something like that. And I spent another year there as well, like just doing other things and helping maintain it and so on and so forth. And that's what took me from accounting, finance, though, into IT, was this big, massive put in an ERP system to support this country project that we had in Saudi Arabia.
I want to ask you more about that, but before I do, you said something about the nature of your work changing and your willingness and ability to embrace that new way of working, and that served you well in terms of getting that opportunity, which in turn advanced your career. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
It's just too tempting not to jump onto that theme and ask you about how AI parallels what you just described as a pie chart and PowerPoint, maybe.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts? What do you see happening in the HR work tech space around AI disrupting the way the work gets done and those embracing it to their benefit and the benefit in turn of the team or organization?
Yeah, I think it's pretty that's a great question, Alan. And AI certainly in the HR work tech space, right? It's the number one conversation, right? Everyone is having. It's if it's not the first thing a company talks about when they're describing their products, it's among the top three, and it's becoming more and more embedded in these HR applications instead of being just a bolted on capability. Here's the thing that's interesting, I think. Unlike the 90s, say, or even probably later years as well, people weren't sitting around at home messing around with PowerPoint or Harvard Graphics or Excel for fun and then going to work and, "Oh, I know how to do that stuff, right? I can do a PowerPoint chart because I just did one over the weekend." Interestingly enough, with as AI, with generative AI especially, right? It's most people by now have at least tried it, right? Just for fun almost in their own life, or maybe they've worked with a child or a family member who's a student. And I read an interesting story the other day how Chat GPT usage has spiked back up in schools back in session, but like public schools and in colleges and whatnot. But many people now are getting experience and hands-on interaction with technologies like AI. Certainly, we saw this with social media a few years back, right? Everybody adopted social media in their personal lives before social media and social media concepts became like a real big part of enterprise tools where people were already familiar with them, right? And I think the same thing to a certain extent is happening with Gen AI. So I do think that there's less of that reluctance that I described that I encountered in the mid 90s, right? With people who didn't want to use Excel to do their monthly profit and loss statement. They'd rather use that ledger book, right? That old fashioned debit and credit ledger book thing, right? Which still existed when I started working. And because they weren't, these technologies were so new to them. They were unfamiliar, they're perhaps a little bit scary. And as we see in enterprise tech a lot, and we're hearing some of this with AI, there's a fear, right? Because there are you might read certain stories or hear other people tell stories or read things in the media about, oh, technology XYZ is here now going to replace workers and reduce jobs or reduce the hours that you might get, whether it's robots, advanced robotics on a manufacturing assembly line, or it's an AI tool that's going to help us write a better job description that we're going to post online. That's somehow a threat. And when we're threatened as humans, often we want to fight back, we push back. I do think the lesson, though, certainly in my life, but the lesson over the arc of maybe 50 years, right, of technology advancing in workplaces is it those who are open, those who are willing to explore, to experiment, to embrace it, to be curious about it. In the longer run, certainly you're going to be much better off, not only for things like job security, potential for advancement, opportunities to get better assignments, things, some of the good things that happened to me because I was willing to embrace technology, but also just to be more successful at what you're doing today. And I think some of the really interesting and hopefully going to be impactful expressions of AI technology in the HR space are going to help people do just that, just to be a little bit better, a little bit more efficient, maybe even seem incrementally more efficient, but more efficient, more productive, more successful at what they're doing, and ultimately benefit them and benefit the organization. And I do think that uh, since as a society, I don't know if you've got older relatives, aunts, parents, grandparents, whoever it may be. You think about that person in your life and you think that everyone's got that person. For every one of those people who, oh, they can't figure out how to do X, Y, and Z, there's another one who's, you know, DMing you on Instagram and FaceTiming you and doing all the things, right? Like
Right.
totally embrace that lifestyle. And I think the fact that technology's become so much more a part of our everyday lives, it's improved our ability to embrace it and adopt it and experiment with it in workplaces. And certainly for me, it's been a great set of experiences. I'm still waiting though, Al. Can't reach it. It's behind me. I'm waiting for I have my Oculus VR headset thing. We jumped on that and all of a sudden everybody ran away from it. I was hoping that was going to really catch on in our space. And so far it hasn't. We'll see. It's
Yeah,
still coming around.
I'm observing the same thing. And I want to get back to your career arc. But before I do, since we're talking about I want to get your thoughts on this fear that you brought up, as well as the opportunity that's on that same coin, arguably. And for HR professionals specifically, you talk about elevated efficiencies, which I certainly agree with. There is a concern that HR is not only going to get changed radically in terms of how I, as a HR business partner, for example, spend my day and the nature of my work, but it might even be the case where you might have had 10 HR business partners. Now you have five or something like
Mhm.
that. So The underlying fear, if you will, is that the discipline is going to shrink. What do you think about that? Do you believe that to be true? Is there room for maybe the opposite to occur if the nature of that role shifts to be more consultative and true partnering? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think the shift out, if I had to speculate, is probably the more likely outcome. And it's tough on these. It's a great question though. And I don't have this data point exactly, so I'll just describe it a little bit. I was at an event a couple of weeks ago at ADP, who everybody knows ADP, and they have a great asset and resource at ADP. And this is not a commercial for ADP. I don't work for ADP. I don't do anything with ADP, but they just have this great group called the ADP Research Institute, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Al, and many listeners probably are. They publish lots of research around the world of work because they have so much data about how people are working, how they're getting paid, how they're moving up and down organizations, et cetera. Everybody knows ADP. At this event, though, they talked about here's a chart on the ratio, the HR ratio, which is always talked about in organizations. How many HR people do you have per 100 FTEs or per 100 employees, essentially, right? And you think over time, right, that number would, if technology is really changing HR to that manner and really threatening jobs, you'd see that number come down. Maybe come down slowly, but you'd see it come down. It's actually not coming down. It plateaued for a while and it actually started going back up again, right? Through the pandemic years. And then it's plateaued again at a higher value. So long story short is we're not their data, and it's really good data, right? They have data on literally millions of US workers and global workers as well. This was US data I'm specifically describing here. That the number of HR people per 100 employees across the wide swath of organizations in America, it's not going down. It's actually, if anything, it's going up a little bit, right? So what does that tell us? It probably tells us that even though new technologies are being introduced into the profession, all kinds of new technologies, right? The movement of HR systems to the cloud, right? We talked about that earlier. Doing automation of processes that used to be on paper, putting technology in managers and employees' hands via self-service, right? Empowering all kinds of people in the organization to do more HR type functions on their own, and now the introduction of more AI technologies, none of those things yet are reducing the average number of HR people in an organization, right? Full scope. Now, that doesn't mean that some organizations haven't reduced HR headcount because of technology. Like, sure, it's happened, but overall, it's not really happening. And so that suggests, anyway, that the introduction of these new technologies is helping to maybe elevate the HR profession to say, okay, we still need the HR people that we've had before, and let's provide an opportunity for them to provide more value in the organization, particularly in the ways that technology can only take us so far. So, a good example might be technology, say, whether we call this AI or not, or it's just technology, who cares? It doesn't matter. Technology can flag, and many of the systems do something like this, might flag to a manager, hey, Al, you haven't had a one on one meeting with your employee, Joe, in 6 weeks. You probably ought to check in with this person. And oh, by the way, Joe's called out sick 3 times in the last 5 weeks. That's 82% more, right, than the average for this department. You really should have a conversation with them. And maybe you're busy, you're managing 25 people in a retail location or something, and you didn't notice maybe, or you didn't notice it was becoming a pattern. The technology helped you and nudged you to go have that conversation. Technology yet really can't have that conversation for you about how to talk with Al. It doesn't know you, Al, and your employee, that employee better. Hopefully, you're able to understand what they're going through a little bit more, maybe any specific circumstances in the work environment that may be troubling, all of the things, right? We still need you to do those things, right? And maybe you'll need some coaching from your HR rep to have that conversation as well, right? And so that person can then help you navigate your way through that conversation. So I do think it's a simple example, but I do think that's the type of example that we're seeing of how the technology is just supplementing and augmenting our ability to become better managers of people, better stewards of the talent assets in our organization, and the ability to think a little bit more broadly about challenges in the organization, particularly around bias and things like that, where we've known they've existed for a really long time. We just didn't really have the capability. Pay transparency and pay equity is another one. where we're maybe better able to finally attack some of these longstanding problems in organizations. We still need the people to attack them, but now we've got more and more technology solutions to help them, right, manage these challenges. So I see it as a win. I'm very optimistic. I'm a tech guy. I'm very bullish about technology. The data, at least anyway, the ADP data I referenced still tends to indicate that we still need HR, if not as much as we needed it. We need it even more.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing, and I love the way you phrased it in terms of HR business partners and similar roles serving as stewards of the talent within the organization. And that brings to mind a recent discussion I had with Dean Carter, a former chief people officer at Patagonia, and now the chief people and purpose officer at Guild Education, who talks about a new role that he created around a talent mobility and agility. I believe it's the naming convention where their role is to understand the future of work in relation to the roles that currently exist. In other words, preparing the workforce for the future in a very conscious, planful way in partnership with them, as opposed to just thinking that you have all the answers. That there's ongoing discussions both individually and at macro levels. So that's what I took out of what you just shared there, and that's my hope is that yes, HR business partners are still needed and they're actually doing higher value, high impact work. So we'll see. There's so many questions that I have for you. We've talked about you being AT&T, and T, and then now you're in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and you started the HR happy hour. Fast forward, you became the chair of the HR technology conference. And I want to understand how that occurred. And I understand that there's going to be some players' names that are going to come up for sure. And then as you answer that, I would love to hear about the introduction of work tech. Number one, when did you see that naming convention first appear? And how do you draw the
That's a good
distinction
question.
between HR tech and work tech? But
That's
first off, conference, how did you get to that stage?
Yeah, the conference story is fairly simple. It was probably around 2013 or 14, and I one of those 2 years, I don't remember it now even specifically which one it was. I had moved on from the teaching and the college stuff I was doing, running the HR technology there, and I was working it's on my LinkedIn profile, so this is no big secret. I was working for Oracle. I went to work for Oracle, which is the ERP anyway, the system I had the most experience with in my career. I went to work for them, and I was part of the team that was helping to design and build their early cloud HR offerings, right? In the talent management side specifically was where I was. What a wonderful team of people. And many of them are still there. And shout out to them because they're doing an amazing job in the space. The Oracle Cloud HCM product is remarkably advanced and has had nothing to do with my contributions 10 years ago, by the way. Despite my contributions, it has come an incredibly long way. But I was working for them at the time on product strategy and doing customer support and going on the road and helping to talk with customers who were on the legacy types of products, right? The old on-premise, right, suites of products, which were certainly in 2013, those companies were still running for big HR and payroll implementation, certainly anyway, right? And to help them try to navigate their way forward to take that journey with us to the cloud, right? Because we were moving to the cloud for the first time as well. And so it was great. What a great job and great people I worked with. But and was still doing the podcast. The HR Happy Hour was probably and certainly I don't know if it's more popular than it is now, but it had become pretty popular. And I had the blog too. I was still just doing all the media stuff. So I had a bit of a outward facing persona already in the space. But I did have the day job, of course, working with Oracle and then the HR Technology Conference, which had been around for at that point still probably maybe close to 20 years. It'd been around a long time was the largest and still is the largest global conference covering all things HR technology and I guess hopefully now work tech, as you mentioned, Al. And I'll talk about that in a second. I don't know if I have a great answer to that question, but that the conference had been founded and helped co-founded anyway, and had been shared by Bill Cudick, who's a guy I'm sure you knew, Al, and many of the folks listening to the show probably knew. And he was getting ready to retire, right? He'd been doing it a long time. He was the first and founding kind of chair of that conference, along with the folks at HR Executive, and was ready to step down. And they They searched around. I don't know how many people they talked to about finding a new person to be the program chair of the conference. And I interviewed for it and ultimately accepted the role and have been doing it since then. So it's been about 10 years now that I've been the program chair of the conference. So it was really a combination of my background and expertise doing enterprise IT, doing HR and payroll systems work, teaching on HR and payroll systems, and then the media stuff as well, which gave me a lot of exposure to the market back then and still does, quite frankly. I still do the podcast like we did back then. And that's been great experience for me. I'm still doing it. And largely working with folks like yourself, thought leaders in the industry and experts, HR leaders, analysts, researchers, academics, right? Everybody that we find to come on stage and either present their findings, present new research, provocative new ideas, even customer case studies, quite frankly, outright. Let's talk about an implementation that a particular company did of an ATS or a performance system or a compensation system, whatever the case may be, and really trying to gather all the best minds, all the best stories, all the best insights, get them all together for a few days every year in the fall. And then I'm fortunate enough that I get to be really heavily involved in it. I get to get up on stage and say, "Hey, everybody, welcome to HR Tech," which is fun. And it's a really cool thing. And I guess the other thing I'll mention, I didn't do this at the initial when I first started doing that job, but one of the things that I've done over the last few years, and I did this year as well, is I'm a big part of what we call the top HR product of the year process. That's jointly sponsored by Human Resource Executive and the HR Technology Conference. So we go out to the HR technology market, the provider community, and we solicit, give us your best innovation of the last 12 months and submit them. And we'll pick 10 or so or 12 or so what we think are the very best expressions of innovation and moving the HR technology market forward. And it's exhausting to do all those, read all those submissions and do all those demos. I spend literally all summer pretty much doing it. But our winners are out there. People can look on HR Executive online and see who won this year. But it's a great process, and it gives me honestly a really good vantage point about okay, what am I hearing? What am I seeing? I'll give you a great example. You mentioned this, Al, about opportunity and development, and yeah, a second ago. A few years ago, I'll mention, since I've talked to about them already a couple of times, I'll mention again, our friends at Oracle about 3 years ago submitted a new product that they called the Oracle Opportunity Marketplace. This was a capability that allowed companies to post both internal jobs, like normal jobs in the organization, but also to post short-term projects or gigs or simple little activities that the organization might need to be done. And they could set up a posting and say what needed to be done for how long, what are the skills that we're looking for, et cetera, right? Who the project manager might be, and post that onto a marketplace. And any employee inside the organization could see that opportunity and submit themselves for it if they had a little extra time or a little more bandwidth, or more importantly, they had a skill that wasn't being utilized in their current role, or they had a skill that wasn't being utilized at all, or they had a skill they would really wanted to develop, but maybe weren't going to be placed in a full-time role to develop that skill, right? Great idea. Looked great. It worked wonderfully. And they won an award for it that year. And in the 4 years since then, I think I've demoed about 7 more opportunity marketplaces that have other providers have created. And I'm not saying they're all following the lead or anything like that, but I'm saying is it it helps, seeing all that helps me understand, hey, this is now a thing. And if you're a talent management technology company or an organization looking to invest in talent management technology, this idea of an opportunity marketplace or an internal opportunity marketplace is something you really need to be thinking about, right? Because it's now a really important thing, both in the technology community, but also as evidenced by how it's helping organizations develop their people, and how you're developing your people is really what helps you succeed in the current marketplace, but also helps you retain talent that you need for the future marketplace as well. And I don't know that I would get to see all that as early as maybe I get to if I weren't doing this top HR products of the year process every year.
Number one, you do a great job organizing and facilitating, just doing what you do. So on behalf of the community, thank you for that.
Well, I
I mean,
appreciate that, Al.
and Bill created a really high bar for you and you've met it and brought it to another level. So kudos to you and the team. I love the example that you brought up. And I also want to call out and celebrate the fact that given how you've evolved over the years, so many vendors look at HR Tech as the seminal event of the year to showcase these innovations. So it's driving innovation. It's okay. I'm going to be in front. I'm going to defend my dissertation. I need to get my homework done. I need to do this so I can showcase it in front of the community on this date in the fall. So again, just want to call that out and celebrate it. I want to take what you just shared and go back to the work tech, HR tech question. And I have a reason, for it because there is this case where, we have behind me is a book, Rob Cross, Beyond Collaboration Overload. There's another book that he co-wrote with Karen Dillon, The Micro Stress Effect. And there's other books that and articles and that point to the fact that we are getting inundated with digital products and getting to this point where potentially it's too much. And it's like now in the quote unquote flow of work, which sounds great, but if everyone's competing to get into the flow of work, what does that do to the employee experience? And is that going to be more distracting than value added? So, from my perspective, there's a lot of good, but there's also this potential risk. So, what are your thoughts based on your vantage point and all the products that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And it's a tricky one because I think of over the last few years, I have seen a lot of the traditional HR tech vendors and or the talent management vendors, rewards and recognition space has done a lot of this, but even the straight payroll companies have done some of this too, is find ways to integrate their capabilities into these flow of work systems that you're talking about, Al. So, right, Slack or Teams or this would be another one probably, and try to coexist with them and try to meet people where they're at with this idea, particularly in the through the pandemic era, and this for at least for not desk-based workers anyway, right? This idea that everybody's staring at screens all day or on their phone or on a laptop or something, and they're in Slack all day or they're in Teams all day, and let's get our tools where they're at because we know they're in Slack and in Teams all day. But I think, as you allude to, the work of Rob Cross and others have certainly suggested that, hey, we're already overloading people with these digital tools, and it's almost become a meme, right? Like it's the constant pinging and the bells going off and the reminders and Slack messages and all the things. And if it's becoming, are we defeating the purpose of these HR tools, which are really at their core, essentially designed to help make people's jobs better, easier, more productive, help them be more successful in their jobs. Are we doing too much by having them almost forcing them, forcing is not maybe the fair word, encouraging them too strongly to be constantly interacting with the HR system, right? If you think about a lot of different careers you've had, how much do you really want to be interacting with the HR system? An argument can be made you really don't want to be interacting with it all that much. You only want to be interacting with it when you really need to or when you choose to. And that's a fine line. And I think that that HR tech, work tech thing is, on the one hand, you could say, oh, it's just a semantic construct somebody made up. But on the other hand, you could say there's actually some meaning there because if I thought about it, and I haven't thought about it a lot, I'll confess, but that the HR tech things, mostly what we talk about at the HR tech conference, tend to fall into largely those classical HR functional silos, right? So you think of any big HR organization who has a CHRO, that CHRO is going to have a person reporting to her or him, right? Who's the director of benefits, the director, the chief learning officer, the head, whoever's the head of talent acquisition, whatever their title is, right? Head of learning, there'll be a comp person, right? It's pretty much in most big companies, right? And so the HR tech solutions I think about often still, I hate to say it, fall into those silos often, right? We think, oh, that's a
Mhm.
comp system, that's a talent acquisition system, that's a performance management system, right? Maybe a chief talent officer might have responsibility for work tech, right? That's a whole different animal, right? That sits across.
Mhm.
It's more of an operational system, right? Sort of the OS of the organization from an operational perspective, right? So most typically things like Teams and Slack, but they're certainly not the only ones, right? But I think often those systems fall into the cracks though, right? The CIO was probably responsible for owning the relationship with the provider, but certainly not going to be typically, I don't think, responsible for their impact and their usage, right, in the organization, that how they're impacting people's lives, impacting their productivity, impacting their well-being, right? Uh, of people are Slack messaging their colleagues at all hours of the day, 24/7, right? Who's owning that, right? Who's in the organization saying, "I'm not sure that's a great idea," right? And
Yeah.
I don't know who it is, right? It could be argued it's an HR person. It could also be argued it's maybe a chief operating officer so I think work tech can be, I think I worry sometimes when industries make up words that are designed to confuse people. And I'll tell one quick story. I know we're probably running long.
Well, we're good.
The people who bothered me a lot, and they still bother me, a few years ago are the people who said, you can't say work life balance anymore. You have to say work life integration or work life flow or work life synchronization or whatever the word you use. You couldn't use balance anymore because that was too, it strongly implied there's work and then there's life. And they're two different things and you must keep them separate, blah, 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 blah. And I got annoyed. Okay, they meant, I get the idea. Okay, people's work and their lives, they intersect more than they used to, but every single person in the world understands what work life balance means, the concept. We all knew what it meant, right? Everybody knows what it means. Even people who don't care about this and spend all day thinking about it. Everybody knows what it means. And then the work life balance people showed up and said, we can't use that term anymore, that everybody understands what it means. We must use some other term. And I think they did it just because they just wanted to make up a new term and give TED Talks about it or something. I don't know what they wanted. So I I worry that the work tech thing, like, I just sometimes I think, let's not confuse. That doesn't have as much meaning to me as HR tech, which I think more people understand what it is, right? So that's all. But and
Yeah. Thank you for
normal
sharing that.
people.
As a advisor, consultant, one of my opportunities to deliver value is to highlight important distinctions. If something's fuzzy, if we can make it more clear, that's a good thing. And particularly if we come in with a certain perspective based on our knowledge of a certain space or something. However, to your point, yeah, there's is a point of diminishing marginal returns. And if we're doing it for our own sake, our own egos, that's not a good thing. And to your point, I can see some of that creeping in. Oh, oh, here's the model that needs to be used. That's not as good as this and all that. So I certainly appreciate what you're saying. I also go back to this notion, however, that there might be some worthwhile distinctions between the types of technologies because arguably there's increasing overlap. And if there is, in fact, increasing overlap that's affecting the employee experience, can and should there not be more and better governance around how decisions are made, how they're implemented, maintained, and enhanced over time? That's a question. That's something that I look for because at the end of the day, to the nature of my question, yeah, how are people being impacted? If they're overloaded, there's diminishing returns there. So, no, I
Yeah.
certainly appreciate.
And I
Yeah.
do think there's an effectiveness conversation to be had too. If I were in an IT role or an HR role in a very big company, I'd be really mindful of all the places my employee data resides. It speaks to your
Mhm.
governance comment out, right? Between my payroll system, my core HRIS system, if they're not, and often they're not the same, even in big companies, talent systems, recruiting systems, work tech systems, as we've talked about, of collaboration systems, et cetera. I've got information about the person who's only one person, right? And there's only so many things we can understand about that person or describe about that person or assign to that person or want to know about that person. There's only one of them. And now I've got the job of making sure that person is reflected properly, sufficiently, adequately, whatever the right term is, in all of these places around the enterprise, such that we are giving them access to all the information they need to do their job, their access to the resources that they need. We're honoring their contribution appropriately. We're compensating them properly. We're connecting them to the resources, people resources that they might need, all the things we might want to do. And we're honoring their well-being too, right? And it's only one of them. And now when we have their information potentially all across the gamut of systems, it's obscenely difficult for large organizations to keep that all straight. And each time we introduce a new category and then some new tools, right, to fit that category, that's a challenge that people who stay up all night and don't get enough sleep and have to worry about, and it's all behind the scenes, right? And it's certainly something to think about. It's the less sexy part of this work technology, but certainly an important part of it too.
So I have one more question, then I'm gonna go into my 4 rapid fire
All right,
questions, and then I'll
sure.
give you a chance for, closing comments. So the question I wanna ask you, and you can take it whatever direction you want, what are your hopes for the future? And embedded within that, do you have concerns about the future? And obviously, AI would be, top of mind, but within the HR tech space, are you bullish and excited? Are you concerned about anything? What are your thoughts there as we start to wrap?
Yeah, I'm really bullish. I do. I'm an optimist. I'm a technologist at heart. Definitely an optimist about this stuff. I Going back to the very first story I told about my experience with benefits open enrollment, like 15 whatever years ago, I do appreciate, understand, and value and elevate the impact these technologies have on people's lives. I One of the big things we've done, you graciously, Al, allow me to talk about my podcast and some of my things a little bit on here. One of the things Trish and I have done over the last couple of years is made a very concerted effort in our stuff, in our work, to try to raise the voices and the profiles of folks who traditionally have difficulty gaining access to opportunity in the workplace specifically, right? So whether that's physically disability, people with mental challenges, people who were formerly incarcerated, people who were out of the workplace due to caregiving needs and now trying to re-enter the workplace, working parents, you name it, right? Like we've tried to really shine a light on as many of those stories as we have been able to over the last couple of years. And I do think my hope is that the technologies that basically help run so many of these organizations and help manage people's experiences with the organizations will continue to adapt and evolve and support everyone in the organizations, and not just knowledge workers in Silicon Valley or remote workers like me, perhaps even you, Al. I mean, everybody, people who are on the autism spectrum, people who are, or just people who are not disabled in any way, but they're frontline workers who are trying to get 20 hours a week and need to know when those hours are going to be because they have childcare, they have school, and they have another job that they're trying to manage. What are we doing as an industry, as a group of technology providers to do everything we can to both certainly support the needs of the organization, but elevate people's lives and support them and help them live better lives and have better, more fulfilling careers as well. Or even if they're not careers, even if they're just jobs, even if they're just gigs, what can we do to
Yeah.
make them the best that they can be? And so I'm really optimistic that every year I see one or two or three things that, oh, that really did that, really does it, right? I'll shout out our friends at HireVue a couple years ago, did a great tool for helping people do interviews, people who are on the autism spectrum, helping them get through virtual interviews in a way that helps support them and gives them that fair chance at opportunity. So things like that, there's lots of examples. So I'm optimistic. I do think that this technology, this industry is and can continue to be a force for good. And yeah, I'm still really invested in it. I'm excited about it. I love telling stories. I love sharing the stories as well.
See, you gave me chills as you were sharing that because you're talking about inclusion, you're talking about creating senses of belonging, you're talking about humanizing work. And so thank you for doing what you do. And I have to sneak this in right now because you were the first one that came into my consciousness of doing a podcast or anything like it
All right.
within the HR space. So you've in turn inspired me to do
That's
this
awesome.
and
Yeah.
other things. Yeah. So thank you for doing that. And the way, to your point, it's a very humanistic and kind, and you do a great job elevating others, and I just wanna celebrate that, and with that, are you ready for my rapid fire
Let's
questions?
go. I'm ready. I have a little
Alright, here we
long
go.
list, so let's do it.
Alright, yeah, so, your favorite genre of music?
I'd probably go 80s alternative.
Nice. Any bands or singers that jump to mind?
Yeah, I was New Order guy for sure, the Smiths, right? I'm thinking of my college days, maybe a little bit before that, like the Police when the Police were still alternative before they became like super mainstream. Yeah, bands like that probably.
Fantastic. What do you do for fun?
I I'm trying to still work out. That's my main kind of every day trying to get that 45 minutes to an hour in. That's one thing for fun. And I'll tell you another thing. Recently, it's become super fun for me. We recently rescued a dog, a 9-year-old dog, a little Yorkie Cairn Terrier mix who had just had an awful life. And we managed to get lucky enough to get her. And we have been taking her to the park just about every night for a long walk. But the first time we took her, it's a half mile around, right? This park on this trail. She couldn't make it a third of the way around, had to be picked up and carried, right? Just had no strength, no energy, just and now we almost run the half mile around. This is 3 months later. We're like running a half mile practically around every night. So that's if I were to say I work out, I do that because I have to. I do like it. What I do for fun is I take the dog for a walk at night after dinner. That's my fun.
That sounds fun. And we didn't talk about this, but who is the we? Who
That's
the we?
Karen. Yeah, Karen, who I live with here. And we just, yeah, we have an awesome time. And Tilly is our dog's name, and Tilly runs the roost.
Fantastic. And so who, inspires you, whether it be currently or formerly, or whether it be, I don't know, a celebrity or somebody in your personal life that a listener might not know about? Where do you get your inspiration?
Yeah, that's a really good one. I'm trying to stall for a second to really think. Writers, yeah, I'm a big reader. I'll give you one whose books I love, Chuck Klosterman, who's written a lot of nonfiction books. And one I read recently was all about the 90s. It was like a survey, a cultural survey of the 90s. I don't know if I have a book sitting right here if I remember the title. It's yeah, it's just called The 90s. That's my book recommendation as well. I love his stuff and he comes on podcasts a lot. So he'd be one, just thoughtful, interesting. And the other thing I love is Melvin Bragg, who's like on the BBC, who hosts this history podcast I listen to all the time. It's called In Our Time. I don't know if he inspires me, but I love him. He's like a crusty, I think he's old. I don't know. I don't want to be an ageist here. He sounds like an older gentleman. And the way he manages his podcast, I don't ever do it online because he's very gruff and he'd be like, if he's going to ask me the first question, he'll say, Al Adamsen, tell me about Julius Caesar's conquest or whatever. And he uses like their full name when he addresses them. He's just awesome. So those are the two that came to mind. That's a good question, Al.
Based on your energy, I believe both inspired, and now I'm going to look into them. And so, thank you for that. So, final question: it I'm sure, and you actually alluded to this earlier. What is your advice or recommendations for young people who are entering the workforce within the next few years, like high school and college students? What is your one or two tidbits of ideas for them?
Yeah, that's a great one. I have a college student son right now. So what would I tell him? I would say definitely be curious, but definitely be confident, but not cocky, and appreciate that most folks are really there to want to help you learn and help you grow. They want you to succeed. They want their organization to succeed and to really and they appreciate being asked, right? One thing I've definitely seen is appreciate it myself with the younger person. We've worked with a couple of interns in the organization, and yeah, it's great when they ask you a question about your background or your history or how to do something or how you might approach something. And I don't want to come off as the old guy. Respect your elders and pay your dues. It's not about paying your dues. It's appreciating those who came before you and appreciate what they have to learn and understanding that almost everybody's willing and certainly able, but definitely willing to help you grow as well. They love to share what they know, particularly with younger people. I know I do. Yeah, be respectful, be confident in your own ability, bring your ideas certainly. But yeah, really just appreciate the fact that the folks who are there have a lot to offer as well.
Golden, love it. Closing comments as we wrap.
Yeah, Al, my closing comments is thank you so much for your time, your patience. Listeners and viewers don't know I rescheduled on Al twice before we were able to get together. My apologies and thank you so much. Al is a wonderful guy. He's been so supportive of me. When I first got this HR tech gig that we talked about at the conference, Al was like maybe one of the first persons who reached out. Hey, what can I do? He still does it today, 10 years later, still doing it. And so that's my closing comments. I want to make sure everybody listening to this appreciates all that you continue to do for people like me who, when honestly you didn't have to. And I absolutely appreciate it. And I'm probably just one of 100 stories people could tell about you. So I want to thank you. That's my closing thought.
It's very kind. That was not the purpose of that, but I will take it. I will appreciate it. And again,
Yeah.
similarly, been a great relationship, one that I value immensely. And I thank you so much for sharing your story, doing what you do, and get to see you live and in person very soon.
I can't wait. I hope to see everybody out in Las Vegas.
Thank you for listening to the My Future of Work podcast with me, Al Adamsen. Visit myfow.net to find resources, research, and learning experiences related to the future of work. We particularly tailor our programs for students, early career professionals, and those in career transition. So again, myfow.net, and let's continue to make great things happen.